see a bunch of firemen boarding an Amtrak train. With tears in our eyes, told each other, we're going. It was frantic digging. It wasn't slow-mo, it was frantic.
That was kind of what you hold on to, is hope, whatever hope you can find.
We would go again because that's what we do.
That's what we do.
Let's not focus this 20 years later on this terrible act, but the amazing American people.
A sea of flags, nearly 3,000 of them, honoring the Americans who lost their lives 20 years ago this weekend. Good morning to you. I'm Katie Moore, standing outside Kleinhans Music Hall, where you can see all of these flags in the ground. You're probably used to seeing this display on Delaware Avenue outside the Red Cross Mansion, the Clement Mansion. It's been moved to Kleinhans this year because they're having a special memorial concert this weekend honoring all of these lives lost. And speaking of lives lost, I want to show you what each of these flags has on it. A small card with the name of a person who was killed in the attack. This one for Ellen Mary Rice from New York City. Every single one of these flags has one of those cards and has a name attached to it. This weekend, of course, we're going to remember all of those victims who died when planes crashed into the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and of course that field in rural Pennsylvania. Again, that special concert taking place tomorrow. And this morning, we're going to remember that day. We'll tell you the memorial events taking place in Western New York this weekend, and we'll also look at how a special memorial in Amherst that you might pass often started to take shape in the days following the attacks. And then finally, we're going to speak with 6 first responders from Buffalo. They risked their lives to help the people of New York City on that day. All of that coming up for you in a bit, but we need to start by getting everybody out the door this morning. Ed, you can tell it's a little bit of a cooler start to the day as we're standing outside here in this field of flags.
You know, when you think back to September 11th, 20 years ago, you know, I don't really know what it was like here in Western New York, but in New York City on Long Island, it was that beautiful, clear, crisp September morning. Sun in the sky, not a cloud in the sky.
It was just like that here. Blue skies on that Tuesday morning with, you know, crisp start to the day, like you mentioned there. So just like that in New York City. Not the case today. It is cool out there, but...
Aaron, thank you. And we bring you back live out here to Kleinhans Music Hall. Today and throughout the weekend, the country is going to take time to remember the 9/11 attacks and the nearly 3,000 people who died, but also to honor the heroes who risked their lives to help others. Here at Kleinhans will be a memorial concert by the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra called American Resilience 20th Anniversary Commemoration to 9/11 Heroes. That's at 7:30. The Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park encouraging people to come by tomorrow and transform the day into a day of service. You can donate blood all day at a blood drive from 8:30 until 5, and there'll be a remembrance ceremony tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning right on the 9/11 Memorial Pedestrian Bridge over the Skidjaquada. In Gretwick Park in North Tonawanda, a reading of all of the names of those 3,000 victims surrounded by another field of flags representing all of them. And there'll also be a special remembrance ceremony at Memorial Hill Grove in Amherst. It is one of the first official memorials to the victims of 9/11. It's right on the Amherst bike path between North Forest and Millersport Highway. The town of Amherst actually approved $50,000 for that memorial 10 days after the attacks. Construction started immediately. This memorial consists of a structure and then surrounded by dozens of trees, including 11 oak trees, our national tree, to symbolize the resilience of the country and our community. In the center, a pile of jagged rocks as well as ashes from the World Trade Center.
There was just such an outpouring of support to put something together to remember so that the next generation would know of this awful tragedy.
All the trees and the benches, even the ashes, donated by members of the Amherst community. And right now on our website, you can see a full list of all the ceremonies taking place this weekend. Coming up in our next half hour, you are going to hear from 6 local heroes who rushed to New York City that day 20 years ago to help. Ed? Good morning to you at 6:30 on your Friday morning, September 10th, of course, one day from the attacks that happened on September 11th, 20 years ago, as you look at all of the flags, one representing each victim outside of Kleinhans Music Hall. Good morning to you. I'm Katie Morse. We're out here today because Kleinhans is having a memorial concert. We're going to tell you all about that coming up, as well as some of the different events that are happening here throughout the weekend. But we have to talk this morning about the first responders, because while we remember the attacks, it's so important to remember those people who were the heroes, who helped in the wake of the attack. And that includes 6 local Buffalo firefighters and police officers. And I sat down with them earlier this week to hear what they had to say in the wake of this 20th anniversary.
It's ingrained that, you know, you protect your brothers and sisters at all costs. And so when something like this happens, literally my first thought was just like, when we going, who's in?
Coming up in about 15 minutes, you are going to hear their stories, what they felt on that day, and what they say they will never forget. Some really powerful memories and really powerful moments, Ed and Aaron, that they shared with me. That's coming up in just a bit.
And we actually just posted this story on WKBW.com. I shared it on my Facebook page. It's the one story you have to read and have to watch today, because their stories are so powerful and so poignant. They were really children, in essence, 20 years ago. And now here they are today, kind of reflecting on their efforts. It's really powerful. Stay tuned for that. Let's get you out the door with that 7 First Alert forecast. Aaron Minkowski outside tracking it for us. Hey, Aaron.
Aaron, thank you. As we know, tomorrow marks 20 years of the attacks of September 11th. And this morning, final preparations are being made to remember the victims here in Buffalo, but all across the country as well. President Biden will attend ceremonies at each of the sites where a total of 2,977 Americans were killed. Hijackers simultaneously took over 4 planes. Tomorrow morning, family members are going to gather in Memorial Plaza in New York City, where all of the names of victims will be read aloud. And that list of victims grew by 2 just this week. Remains recovered that day are still being identified to this day 20 years later. The reconstruction in Lower Manhattan remains a work in progress. And a victim compensation fund was set up for survivors and victims' families in the wake of the attacks. According to a report from the Justice Department, more than 18,000 people who filed a claim listed 9/11 related cancers as one of their eligible conditions. That is 48% of claims filed. More than 40,000 people have received nearly $9 billion from the federal fund. And we are going to have coverage all day today and tomorrow here on 7 ABC. There'll be those special editions of 2020 with David Muir and Diane Sawyer beginning tonight at 9. Then Good Morning America will be live tomorrow, Saturday at 7. And immediately after that will be 9/11, 20 years later, America Remembers. That runs from 8 until 1. And then again, in just about 15 minutes, you're going to hear from those Buffalo firefighters and police officers that I sat down with. I will bring you their firsthand story of going to Ground Zero and what they did when they got there. Ed? Good morning and welcome back. The sun coming up on New York City right now, getting ready to memorialize the day that impacted that city and the country for the past 20 years and counting. The sun also coming up here in Buffalo, where we are doing our own remembering of September 11th. This sea of flags on the lawn in front of Kleinhans, leading up to the reflecting pool behind me. And we can come to sites like these. We can sit here. We can reflect. But there's no better way to remember what happened that tragic day than to hear the stories from there passed on. A group of firefighters and police officers from the city of Buffalo suited up when they heard the news of what happened in New York City to give any help that they could. 20 years later, I sat down with those men to hear firsthand how they remember this day.
I turned on the TV just before the second plane hit the towers.
When I was looking at that, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. You want to do something. You just don't want to sit.
And a group of us got together and said, listen, let's go.
In the aftermath of 9/11, firefighters and police officers from Buffalo couldn't get to New York City fast enough. They suited up, prepared to help however they could at Ground Zero.
I remember walking into that scene. It was like Mars. It was surreal, quiet. I just could not believe what I was looking at.
It was quiet. There wasn't a whole lot of talking going on.
One of the buildings was still free burning. They weren't even putting water on it. It was just there on fire.
Some chief said, I want everybody in this area to follow me, and we happened to be in that area. And the next thing you know, we're on the pile helping out. And within 15 minutes, we were working on the first body that we were recovering.
They dug for hours on their hands and knees, passing buckets of rubble down a line of first responders. At one point, they thought they'd be forced to stop.
There was an iron worker that would cut all steel that was in our way, and then we can continue on. And the iron worker that was working with us said, listen, I've been here 24 hours, I got to go home and sleep, drop his tools. And the chief said, well, I guess we're done. And Mike Biasillo, who was the captain of Ladder 4 at the time, picked up the torch and said, Chief, what do you need cut? And because of that, we were able to continue working throughout that night.
These guys were all trained in that stuff. I wasn't, but they were. And they just picked up the equipment. Picked up some of the equipment, some saws and jaws of whatever, and they knew how to do it, and it kept us working through that night.
Day after day, they'd trek back to ground zero.
There were people on our way in, before they put up the fences and everything, that were begging you to find their family member.
They give you pictures.
And give you pictures, and crying, and holding on to you, and just begging, please find them. And we weren't finding anybody. And that's hard. And you want to find, that's what we are trained to do, police and fire. We're trained to help people.
I didn't feel like we were really accomplishing anything because we didn't save a life. That's what we do. But as years went by, I realized that what we did is we lifted their spirits. They saw brother police and firemen that they didn't know who we were. They just knew we were from Buffalo, and we were there holding their spirit up.
That helping spirit carried on decades later by the next generation.
I had a newborn son at home, and I had another son that was 6 years old. And he had actually seen the World Trade Centers because we came to New York for a Yankees game. So he's one of the few people in his generation that actually seen the towers. And he recently was part of the evacuation mission in Kabul with the Air Force. And I'm proud of him. And he had called me from there and said, you know, Dad, you started this and I'm finishing it. We're doing the bookends.
So powerful when you hear their stories. We sat there and we talked for hours, and these firefighters, these police officers, they have been to hundreds, if not thousands, of scenes in their career. And they told me they never thought they'd experience something like this again. Then, almost 8 years later, came the crash of Flight 3407 in Clarence Center, an event that many of them said brought them right back to this day. Guys.
Yeah, and when you speak of the crash of Flight 3407, of course, we're thinking of the Eckert family, Beverly Eckert, on that flight. She was a 9/11 widow, actually met Barack Obama in the days after 9/11, and then to think that she, too, lost her life in the crash of Flight 3407. But perhaps the most, and of course, we're thinking of their family, too, and all the families of 9/11. But when you hear these heroes, these first responders, kind of break down, these guys who are otherwise stoic and stone-faced usually.
They've seen everything.
Exactly. I mean, it hits you to your core. But the amazing thing after 9/11, after all of that, was the national unity and the patriotism, the service to our country that so many of you continue on even today.
Yeah, and the support that we give those guys and ladies. They're true heroes. They went down there, and then they had to deal with 3407 as well. And we need people like that. And we certainly appreciate them every day.
Glad that they're in our community. Katie, thank you. Amazing story. Thank you for sharing their firsthand accounts. Let's get you at the door.